We're fortunate to have with us this morning Mikael Yisrael, who is the founder and president of 11 Enterprises. He's an experienced educator, entrepreneur, policy analyst, diversity practitioner, and college admissions expert. Mikael is from Harlem, New York, and attended Petty School via the Oliver Scholars Program, a selective program for talented, low-income New York City students of African and Latino descent. Mikael is a graduate of Cornell University with a Bachelor of Science in Policy Analysis and Management, and received his Master of Science in Higher Education from Drexel University. Mikael has focused his studies and professional work on the connections between health, family, and social welfare, consumer policy, and education. His experiences have taught him as it pertains to a student's academic profile, not to conflate schooling with education, nor evaluate content without appropriate context. In fact, he believes it's imperative to be cognizant of all cross-sector factors, including but not limited to societal, personal, and other external elements that may influence a student's environment. Mikael served as Assistant Director of Admissions at Petty School, Assistant Dean of Admissions and Co-Director of Multicultural Recruitment at Swarthmore, Associate Director of College Counseling for Access and Programming at Germantown Friends, and currently serves as Director of Equity, Justice, and Engagement at Abington Friends School. Having witnessed and experienced how access to a quality education changes lives, Mikael aspires to apply his knowledge and education and experience to educational institutions devoted to the intellectual, social, and moral development of its students. And as a person, I like this final sentence, Mikael lives on the corner of humility and confidence in a house built on faith. Mikael, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Lee. I really appreciate it. And it's a pleasure to be here this morning with you all. So I greet you all with peace and blessings. You heard that I am the founder of 11 Enterprises. 11, something that was gifted to me, just a vision that I had, thinking about the work that I wanted to do. And 11, of course, for me is coming from Hebrews 11:1. Now faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. And I just wanted to share that just because it's really the backdrop of the stuff that I do. And then I want to reference one more scripture and then read one as well, just to center us here today. The second scripture that I'll just reference is we're talking about faith, right? So just thinking about James 2, verses 14 through 26, really thinking about faith without works being dead. I think about, the work that I do. I think about the world that we live in. I think about the fact that hope is necessary and faith is necessary. But we have to follow that up with action. We have to meet our faith in deed as well. And then the last piece that I'll share with us in terms of scripture, what I just want to read, which is a little long, but I'm sure we're all familiar with it in one way, form, or fashion. And this is really the heart of the work that I do, or at least what is one of my guiding principles and frameworks in equity, justice, and inclusion work. And that comes from the book of Matthew 25, verses 31 through 46. So I'm just going to read those quickly, just to center us and provide a backdrop and a foundation for our conversation today. When the Son of Man comes in his glory and all the angels with him, he will sit on his glorious throne. All the nations will be gathered before him, and he will separate the people one from another as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. He will put the sheep on his right and the goats on his left. Then the king will say to those on his right, "Come, you who are blessed by my Father, take your inheritance, the kingdom prepared for you since the creation of the world. For I was hungry and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger and you invited me in. I needed clothes and you clothed me. I was sick and you looked after me. I was in prison and you came to visit me." Then the righteous will answer him, "Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you something to drink? When did we see you, a stranger, and invite you in, or needing clothes and clothe you? When did we see you sick or in prison and go to visit you?" The king will reply, "Truly I tell you, whatever you do for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me." Then he will say to those on his left, "Depart from me, you who are cursed, into the eternal fire, place prepared for the devil and his angels. For I was hungry and you gave me nothing to eat. I was thirsty and you gave me nothing to drink. I was a stranger and you did not invite me in. I needed clothes and you did not clothe me. I was sick and in prison and you did not look after me. They also will answer, Lord, when did we see you hungry or thirsty or a stranger or needing clothes or sick or in prison and did not help you? He will reply, truly, I tell you, whatever you did not do for one of these least of these, you did not do for me. Then they will go away to eternal punishment, but the righteous to eternal life. Amen. So I just wanted to share that with you all to center our conversation today.
We'll be preaching from that passage later today.
Oh, wow. Look at God. Amazing. Amazing. So I want to go ahead and share my screen and take us through a conversation. So here we go. Right. Can everyone see that screen? It says critical consciousness.
Yep.
All right. Fantastic. So yes, critical consciousness, creating a conscious community. And I think that's what I think is important for us to take away today and wonder what critical consciousness is and how can we better develop a conscious community in the communities that we're a part of. So critical consciousness, what exactly is critical consciousness? I'm not sure if you've had the opportunity to read Pedagogy of the Oppressed, but some of the scholars who really talk about critical consciousness, Paulo Freire being one of them, Bell Hooks being another. There's a number of other folks who talk about critical consciousness, particularly as it pertains to education and teaching folks. But for me, critical consciousness is really about going beneath the surface. So really engaging in thinking, writing, reading, and speaking. You're not just going on myths, cliches. So you're going beyond myths, cliches, and receive wisdom and mere opinion. It's really in order to gain a deeper understanding and deep listening. A deeper understanding comes from spending time with folks who are different from us, and spending time with ourselves for deep reflection. And deep listening is really that opportunity where you're listening to understand as opposed to listening to respond. I'm sure we've all been in conversations where we're just quick, just want to respond, can't wait for the person to stop talking so we can respond, as opposed to actually listening to understand, and then having a conversation with them, whether you have a different perspective. Critical consciousness is also about an internal and external process. So again, I said you have to sit down with yourself, think about all the things that you are, think about your identifiers, thinking about your history, the ways that you know, the ways that you exist in this world. And it's also about external processing, thinking about the people around you, the things around you, the institutions that you're a part of, thinking about all those pieces and the intersection of them, which we'll talk about a little later. But it's really about knowledge of self and others. As the word says, charity begins at home. Another word for charity is love. I believe love starts at home too. If you don't love yourself, how can we possibly love others? So spending time in knowledge of ourselves, love of ourselves, in order for us to have knowledge and love for others. It's really about the impact and interaction of individuals, ideologies, and institutions, seeing how all those things connect, because it's important for us to see those connections and important for us to see how things influence one another so we can get a deeper picture of what's happening around us and sometimes what's happening inside of us. So what is a conscious community? I first got this language from a person by the name of Dan Iannone, and he's talking about what it is for a conscious community. And a conscious community is really a community that heightens awareness and expression. And you can see on the slide here, providing meaning and purpose, responding to human needs. And responding to human needs is important to me, is also referred to by Nell Noddings as the ethics of care, or the ethic of care, responding to someone's need. That's another piece of equity. What equity is really responding to someone's need. What does someone need? Realizing that everyone doesn't need the same thing. And reflect values and culture, encourage and support to really help with learning, growth, and the health and well-being of those who are a part of the community. So I'm sure you can think about what the church does, what your congregation does, how does it engage in being a conscious community. And I'm sure that the encourage, support, learning, growth, health, and well-being is all there, and one that reflects the values and cultures and human need. So here's a key piece in terms of think about these terms. And there's a lot of times that we get into difficult conversations and we're unable to really get to the core of what's going on, because we might not have the same definitions, because we all come from different lived experiences and backgrounds and walks of life. And we might have many commonalities. We might have more commonalities than dissimilarities. However, there's some times where we don't have enough of a background in engaged in language where we're coming from the same perspective in terms of definition. So I always like to calibrate folks and provide some working definitions that helps us with the work. So the top two are from this group called the Varna Group, and I'll read the definitions quickly. I know you can read it on the screen, but I just want to read them as well. And then I'll read what I see as engagement. So equity is an approach based in fairness to dismantle systems that privilege and disadvantage people based on their identities. In practice, it ensures everyone is given equal opportunity to thrive. This means, and this is the important part, this means that resources may be divided and shared unequally to make sure that each person can access an opportunity. Equity takes into account that people have different access to resources because of a system of oppression and privilege. Equity seeks to balance that disparity. Justice. Justice is the end goal of equity efforts. Justice is the result of dismantling systems of oppression and privilege that create barriers to people's abilities to access and resources. So for example, the isms, you think about racism, sexism, etc. And then engagement. This is a piece that I put together when I was thinking about it. I was talking to Leah earlier, and I said, I was hired at Abington Friends School as director of diversity and inclusion. And after everything happened this spring, talking about, particularly after the murder of George Floyd, and thinking about everything that happened in the streets and the protests, et cetera, I said, we need to make our work a little bit more clear and more plain at AFS. And let's name it something that really says our intentions. And I said, let's change it to Director of Equity, Justice, and Engagement. So that way we understand what the roadmap is for us and the work that we have to do. So engagement is diversity and inclusion in action. Engagement reflects connectivity, commitment, and belonging. Successful engagement in equity and justice work stems from education, exposure, and experience. So those are the working definitions I want us to think about as we're about to go through a presentation. I did this last presentation. This is how I was invited to the panel that Aaron was a part of last month. I think it was October. And he, the gentleman from Temple Beth Fam, he had reached out to me because he saw, Fred Goldston, he saw a presentation that I gave at Abington Friends School for our inaugural Social Justice Symposium. I'm going to take us through that presentation, albeit quickly, but I'm going to take us through that because I think there's a lot of key pieces in here and some meat that you could take away with you today. And it's really about radical love, right? And you might have heard this language before. Maybe what is an ally? You might have heard that word thrown around a lot. But more importantly, we're talking about how can we move from that space of being an ally to being a person who's an accomplice. And there's even more beyond that. And I know sometimes folks, when I've given presentations, the word accomplice might be strong for them, or it might be something that they can't really get behind. But hopefully, as we go through this presentation, we can talk about it. As we see the quote from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., I have decided to stick with love. Hate is too great a burden to bear. So just really think about love being at the core of it. One of the things I like to often do, and if we had more time, we would send folks away and really just think about what is the difference between sympathy and empathy. They often get confused. They often get intertwined with one another, and folks might not understand the difference. So you see Kermit the Frog here saying, a lot of folks might think that they show empathy when it's actually sympathy. So how do we really tease out the difference? So according to Grammarly, right, where we see sympathy versus empathy, just breaking down the root words of what they mean. When you see sympathy, it's something, you see someone who's crying and the other person is saying, I'm sorry, that sucks, right? They're not really visibly shaken or moved in any way, shape, or form. Empathy, you see there's tears in both of their eyes. They're both feeling the same thing. So the difference between how to be sympathetic versus how to be empathetic or empathic, right? You see this in the first square. You see someone with their teddy bear's arm, which is broken. And the other person is saying, that's too bad. That's too bad for you. I'm sorry, that's happening to you. It's not really affecting me. So it's not really going to make me feel any type of way other than saying, I'm sorry for you. And then the other piece, how to be empathetic. is I'm going to help you fix this problem because it also impacts me. I also feel it. It might not have happened to me. It might not have happened to my teddy bear, but I see the pain, I feel the pain, and I'm going to take action to help you relieve that pain, right? Alleviate that pain. So here we see the difference between empathy and sympathy. And I know it's swapped a little bit because now empathy is on the other side, but I'll read through those quickly. Empathy is the ability to identify and understand another person's situations and feelings, whereas sympathy is feelings of sorrow and pity for someone else's misfortune. Someone else's misfortune. That's the operative word, is someone else's misfortune. Empathy can understand another situation. Sympathy, you cannot understand another person's situation. Empathy, you may have a similar experience in the past. Sympathy, you don't have a similar experience to draw from. And then you have understanding and acceptance are evoked with empathy. And in the sympathy piece, it's just pity, sorry, and concern are evoked. So even before we get to that part, when we think about empathy and sympathy, it's really a relationship issue. It's really a positional issue. A person who is sympathetic might be a little bit more removed. It's distant. It's a distant feeling, as opposed to empathetic is a very close relational feeling. You feel that pain. I'm sure in the church, a lot of folks who are intercessors, it's heavy. They feel it. The empathy, they just have to pray for someone and they feel that too. They feel someone's pain because we all have gifts in the body, right? And it's really important for us to keep those things in mind when we're thinking about the people who are around us. It might not be happening in our community. It might not be happening in our family, but it's happening. And we have to think about how can we move from being sympathetic to empathetic. But even in that sense, empathy is still not enough. All right, we see the difference between how you can move to a path of engagement. You see, you start off with the sympathy piece, more so on this side of the scale, which is pity. I acknowledge your suffering. And I think if we look at the history of the world, there's been plenty of people who've acknowledged suffering, but that's probably the extent of what their engagement was. They just acknowledged that it was happening. And because it wasn't happening to them, they weren't really provoked to action, so to speak. The sympathy piece, and I think we're starting to see that a little bit more so now, particularly after this past summer and spring and all the things that's been happening there with the protests, the killings, police brutality, this pandemic that we're in, COVID-19, you start to see a little bit more sympathy. I care about your suffering, either because they're now starting to be impacted too, or maybe there's other pieces such as now being in a global pandemic where folks might start to feel and gain a little bit more empathy to the point where they want to get a little bit more engaged because it's really starting to happen to them as well. They're impacted, they're affected. The empathy is that I feel your suffering. And I think there's a group of folks who have been in that sympathy piece, but now, I think they've had enough. And now they say, I feel your suffering. And there's even those who say, I want to relieve your suffering. So when we talked about moving from an ally to an accomplice, you can see on that scale of engagement, you're leaving that place of pity, feeling sorry for someone else and acknowledging their suffering towards, I want to relieve your suffering or be a part of that to help relieve your suffering. And then good is not enough. And this is a piece that, there's a lot of conversations. And when I moved to Philadelphia, I don't have a home church per se. There's a church that before I moved to Philadelphia, my home church was back in Trenton, New Jersey. It was New Hope Church of God, a Pentecostal church. And when I got to Philadelphia, I've attended Enon Tabernacle Baptist Church. I've gone to Zion Baptist Church of Ambler. I've gone to a number of different churches. And just thinking about, the conversation that we have right now, I'm sure you're having the conversation too, thinking about the role that the church is to play, particularly during this time, particularly during this moment. And I'm thinking about those folks who, even those folks who are not in the church, but those folks who are outside of the church who, might go to the protests, they might, be involved in community service, and they might be able to go home and sleep at night because they believe, and they truly are, a good person. But if we're to look at the words of Dr. King, right, good is not enough, right? We will have to repent in this generation, not merely for the vitriolic words and actions of the bad people, but for the appalling silence of the good people. And I know there's plenty of times, particularly me, one of the things that I really ascribe to, and one of the things that leads my work as well, is just Black liberation theology. And I think about that piece too. And I think about the role of the church. And I think about when there's a deafening silence from religious leaders, or when there's folks who might speak out on one situation, but not another. And it seems like it might be inconsistent. It might seem like it's hypocritical. So we're thinking about, when good is not enough. And that piece about the appalling silence of the good people. This is a conversation I have with a lot of my faculty and staff. And I talk about the fact that they are at the institution because they believe in the values that the school espouses. And that's great. But again, as I started at the beginning, faith without work is dead, right? Talk about James 2 again, faith without works is dead. So having the faith, or having the belief in these principles and these values, without actually matching these principles and values in deed and doing the work, is where sometimes we get stuck. We get stuck. But when we think about allyship is not enough. And I would encourage folks, if they have time, to take a look at abolishing the ally industrial complex. And there's a lot of folks who start to challenge this language as well, or say that it's just not enough. And here's why. I gave a presentation at the People of Color Conference, and it was about using hip hop pedagogy, or hip hop in general, as a framework for diversity, equity, and inclusion. And, I've seen in my experiences that allyship can be problematic in a number of different ways. And here's the things that I have listed on this slide. I saw it as, or see it as in some cases, the colonization, commodification, and gentrification of the fight for liberation. I think there's a lot of folks who are in this space, not for the purpose, but for the profit, for the gain. Again, the German word Freudenschade, where someone might be benefiting off of someone else's misfortunes. I don't really have to go through it, but I understand there's a market for it. So maybe I can position myself as an ally, but I'm really, a culture vulture, or I'm really benefiting off of someone else's poverty and their misfortune for my own personal gain. And I've also seen the whitewashing and white splaining of wokeness. So there's a lot of folks who are entering this space, trying to do this work, how to be anti-racist, et cetera. And there's been marginalized folks, particularly marginalized people of color, who've been doing this work forever, but because of systemic racism, they haven't had a voice, or their voice have been silenced, or their voices have not been amplified. But when these words come out of white folks, we appreciate it. But it begs the question of, why haven't we been listened to before, particularly when we're talking about our own experiences firsthand? And just really think about transactional activism versus it not being transformational. So again, going back to the performative, or folks having personal gain, et cetera. So when I talked about moving from ally to accomplice, right? This is a much larger chart. And if you were to Google just actor, ally, and accomplice, you'll see all the pieces here. But just want to read some of the pieces just so we can understand the difference and how we can move towards that accomplice piece. And it says the actors, the actions of an actor do not disrupt the status quo. Much the same as a spectator at a game, both have only a nominal effect in shifting an overall outcome. Such systems are challenged when actors shift or couple their actions with those from allies and or accomplices, right? An ally is typically considered a verb. One needs to act as an ally and cannot bestow this title to themselves. I see this a lot in my line of work, and folks say, I'm an ally. I'm like, who told you you were an ally? Are you doing the work? Does someone from a marginalized group say you're an ally? You can't bestow this title to themselves, right? The actions of an ally have greater likelihood to challenge institutionalized racism and white supremacy. An ally is like a disruptor, an educator in spaces dominated by whiteness. And a keynote on the whiteness piece, because I often want to tell folks, white folks are not the only ones who suffer from whiteness. There's a lot of people of color who can also suffer from and subscribe to whiteness. It's an attitude, right? When we talk about certain things, whiteness is anti-blackness. So when we talk about racism is anti-blackness. When we talk about being anti-racist, what does that mean in terms of anti-blackness? I would say that for me, it means being pro-blackness, and understanding that it has value, and understanding that it has a history and a culture, and we have to understand what that looks like. And then moving to accomplice, the actions of an accomplice are meant to directly challenge institutionalized racism, directly challenge. colonization, and white supremacy by blocking or impeding racist people, policies, and structures. Realizing that our freedoms and liberations are bound together. We retreat or withdraw in the face of oppressive structures is not an option. So remaining on the front lines and getting things done together, but understanding, here's the big piece here, realizing that our freedoms and liberations are bound together. So it's no sympathy piece to the point where I feel sorry for your suffering. We realize that our freedoms and liberations are bound together. Another way that's put is from Lilla Watson, who said, you know, if you have come to help me, you are wasting your time. But if you have come because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let's work together. So again, you're moving from that place of pity to that place of empathy, that place of compassion, to the point where you're shifting from being merely an ally, which is important. But if you stay there, that's how we get stuck. So moving to the accomplice piece. But then even then, you know, the accomplice piece, to put it plainly, is you're a part of disrupting the system. So if there's something that needs to be dismantled, you're there. If there's something that needs to be done, you're there. But what's more than an accomplice? You might have heard this language too. And it's really about being a co-conspirator. So not only are you there for times of disruption, when you have to fight against an oppressive system, but you're also planning that. As a co-conspirator, you're planning that. So instead of just showing up to the protest and being a part of the protest and making sure you're there when things go down, being a co-conspirator helps plan the protest, helps organize the protest, helps organize the fundraiser to help with the bail of the activists who are getting arrested for their protesting, things of that nature. So that's what it really means to be a co-conspirator. And I like this quote here where it says, the difference between who you are and who you want to be is what you do. Again, when we think about all the faith that we have, when we think about the hope that we have, what are we doing indeed? What are our actions? And if we quote the old adage of actions speak louder than words, I think it's both and, right? You can amplify your voice and you can use words. Those are important. Words are powerful. Written word is powerful. The spoken word is powerful. I think we have to also include actions. And here's something that you don't have to do now. But a big part of this work in shifting from awareness to action is really thinking about accountability. And there's a lot of times with folks, I've seen it before, they might go to a conference, they check all the boxes, right? They buy the book, they get the t-shirt, and, they make the Facebook posts. It's like, the trifecta, I did it. But the accountability piece really comes in. So here's an exercise that I often do, and this is what I want you to think about on your time. And maybe you can even think about it as a congregation. Knowing what you know now, the things that you've sat through, the things that you're hearing, what is something in your life, or maybe what is something in your church that you are going to stop? What is something that you're going to start? What is something that you're going to change? So this exercise is called Stop, Start, Change. So thinking about all the stuff that's happening in the world, thinking about equity, justice, and engagement, thinking about the role of the church, thinking about moving from ally to accomplice, maybe becoming a co-conspirator. One of the things that you would stop, one of the things that you hope and endeavor to start, and one of the things that you seek to change. So that's what I have for you all in terms of what was put on my heart to share with you this morning. And I'm definitely open to any questions or anything that I can illuminate on even more.
Well, I'm going to be greedy, Mikael, and be the first one to ask you a question. So my question is, I know that you work with young people. Is there just anything you can tell us about doing this work with young people? Justin, who's also on the call, he helps me with youth group here at the church. So maybe just a few sentences or a little bit about this work, particularly with young people. And the last thing I'll say, just as part of that question, is one of the reasons I like working with young people on these topics is because it's a lot about vocabulary, and it's you learn a language, with in doing this work. And of course, the younger people are, the more natural new language and vocabulary comes to them. So I wondered if that was also part of your experience.
Yes, I appreciate that question. And I think that sometimes us as adults, we're the ones who hold the children back sometimes because we're saying they're not ready for it. And for a number of different reasons, right? We're trying to protect and preserve innocence. We're trying to make sure that we can hold on to them for as long as we can and not expose them to the evils of the world. And I think that's a conversation that I've often had, particularly when we do affinity groups or affinity spaces at my school. We have a conscious communities program where we really talk about all these things. And, there's been a lot of feedback from parents saying, I don't know if I want my child to be engaged in that. And my response is, whether you think so or not, your child's already being engaged in it. They're consuming it in one way, shape, or form. They're having conversations with their peers, etc. They're hearing something on the radio. They're watching something on the news. They're just listening to conversations. Even when you think they're asleep, they might be listening to a conversation. So really thinking about those pieces and thinking, how can we have responsible conversations that are age appropriate, that are developmentally appropriate? And I would say that part of it is really asking them what's on their mind and allowing them to drive the conversation. So there's plenty of times when I might go into a space and, I run a 4th grade boys group for Black boys. And we have a conversation where we talk about, I teach them the whole notion of Ubuntu, which means humanity. And we always have a greeting, I am because we are because I am. We talk about accountability for each other. But I ask them what's going on in their world and things come up. If you just open the question with an open-ended question, what's on your mind? What are you sitting with? Do you have any questions that you're grappling with today? What are your thoughts on the election? If you just say, what are your thoughts on the election? You might be surprised exactly what comes up. Well, some folks might have a little bit more of a deeper understanding of it. Others might just say, well, I know it's between this one person and someone else. I don't really know why, so you can have those conversations, ask those questions. I think if you ask those questions, you'll be surprised by the answers. And I think you can really start to go from there. So almost in the Socratic seminar, just start to ask questions and then they'll give you everything you need and you could build from that. So I think that's a space. The other thing is also just creating an atmosphere for them to feel safe enough to share, realizing that, safety is relative, but if you can create a brave space where they have some agreements, where they're starting to work together, whether it's like, we're going to have a conversation. You can only speak when you're holding this pen. So I'm going to pass this pen around. And now it's your turn to speak. Everyone gets a chance to speak. So just having some agreements in space for them. So those are some of the things I would say to help with the youth.
I think it's difficult to move from sympathetic to empathetic without some deep experience with folks that you are sympathetic toward. What kinds of engagements do you think work best in terms of moving toward empathetic?
It's a great question. That's a great question. So I say this work really comes across in terms of experience, exposure, and education. So in order for you to get towards that empathy piece, I think it's in certain spaces, depending on your identifier, you decenter what the norm is, right? So one of the things I do in my classes, I teach a class called Power, Identity, and Social Change. And on day one, I decenter whiteness. I decenter whiteness because that's what folks have been fed throughout the schools. And I replace that with powerful and iconic people of color in different spaces that leads us into a conversation about identity. So we're starting in a different place that we often start from. So for example, I showed the movie Black Panther, and if anyone's seen the movie Black Panther, it's predominantly Black cast. And they're not being shown in any negative light, so to speak, right? And we start there, we talk about power, identity, and social change. So what I would say is, one, going back to the critical consciousness piece, read some authors who are a part of marginalized groups. If you want to learn about their experiences, read some books, but it goes past that. You can go hear some of them talk when they're giving presentations. If you have the choice between seeing and if you are a person who identifies as white, if you have the choice between going to see Tim Wise, for example, right, who is an anti-racist activist, versus a Bell Hooks, who's a Black feminist, also about anti-racist, anti-domination, you might be more inclined because of your identity, or you might be more inclined because of what you're comfortable with to go see Tim Wise as opposed to going to see Bell Hooks. I would encourage you to go see Bell Hooks. I would encourage you to step outside your comfort zone. I would encourage you to go see something that you might otherwise think as other because it's different from you. So I would say try to immerse yourself in those many opportunities. I always say there's plenty of times where we read about situations, we read about different people, but we never experience different people. We don't go to their neighborhoods. We don't engage with them. And it's not one of those situations where you should just be trying to jump in and go to certain spaces just to be in certain spaces, but it's really about really doing an audit and thinking about, who are the people that you're surrounded by every day? Who are the people that you talk to every day? What does your world look like? There's an activity that you can do if you get like some jelly beans or lima beans or whatever type of beans. Like you can get some black and white beans, pinto beans, whatever. Get yourself a container and just ask a number of different questions. What is the identity of your doctor? If it's black or if it's white, you can put it in the cup. Then you really start to ask those questions and you put the beans in there, and then you can see your cup to see how diverse your world is. So think about that. If you see that as too much of one, like for me, if I see that's so much black there, I have to think about that. Okay, am I seeing another perspective? Am I understanding other people? Maybe I should seek other spaces to be in. And vice versa, if it's all white there, where can I make this change? Where can I go and actually expose myself to other cultures without being a person who's imposing yourself in other spaces? So I think it's a mixture of all of those things, and it takes time. It doesn't happen overnight. It takes time. But the piece that you talked about in particular, in terms of you have to feel something, and it's one of the things that I shared with folks at my school. I said, you know what? I honestly don't know if we would have had as much of a response to the unarmed killings and police brutality of George Floyd, for example, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, et cetera. The list goes on, and it still continues to happen. I don't think we would have had as great of a response. One, save the younger folks and the younger generation who's really doing a lot of this work. But if we weren't in the middle of a pandemic where folks were actually hurting and going through it, I don't know if we'd be seeing the same type of response. And, a lot of folks, they really have been, because the pandemic doesn't discriminate. Now, don't get me wrong. There are a disproportionate number of people of color, particularly black and brown folks, who are really being ravaged by COVID-19, but COVID-19 doesn't discriminate, right? So with that being said, a lot of folks have been touched in one way, shape, or form. And I think because of that, folks' hearts have been pricked, and they're in a different space now to understand what suffering really looks like, or can look like. And one of the questions that I posed, which was a rhetorical question, was, imagine if we were living with COVID-19 for the past 400 plus years. What would that look like? How would we feel? How would we work? I think for the first time, there's a lot of folks who had to think about what to wear before they leave the house. And in some cases, that's my everyday reality. Even so much so where now, one of the things I've learned as a defense mechanism as a Black male in America, I don't have, because my mask covers up my smile. I can't smile, right? I have, and if it's raining outside, I already didn't want to put a hood on, but now I have a mask on and a hood. And I understand how racism works, and I understand how prejudice works. And now they're not thinking about, oh, it's raining and it's COVID-19, global pandemic. It's like, he might be coming to do something bad. So when we think about these pieces, it's really important for us to sit with, who do we talk to? What do we consume? Where can we make those changes? And understanding that, yes, there has to be, I've been working with something called like prophetic pedagogy, really. And really thinking about, it's almost like salvation, right? It's almost like the ABCs of acceptance. You have to admit, believe, and confess. Like when all these things happen, you have to, one, admit and acknowledge that these things are happening. You have to believe in your heart that they're happening, because sometimes I don't think it really happens. But you have to confess that you're a part of this. You're a part of the problem. We're all a part of this problem in one way, shape, or form. It might not be of our making, but we're all a part of this problem. So what do we do to change it? And I realized that, I can teach, and yet alone, I cannot transform an individual or institution. I'm a disciple. I'm merely a disciple, not the discipline. And an internal reckoning must take place within an individual or an institution in order for them to really have that intimate experience, in order for them to change. And I think that's something that's important. So I appreciate you raising that piece, because it does take connection. And sometimes we can't have these experiences if we don't have diverse folks around us, because we just have echo chambers, or we have folks who have the same experience and we can't get an alternative perspective. So I think it's being mindful of that.
Hey, Mikael, we want to thank you for coming and sharing with us today and challenging us to move away from the status quo. It's much more comfortable to stay where we are than to step out where it's going to be dangerous. So thank you again. We appreciate your challenging thoughts, and may God go with you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, and God bless.
Thanks, Mikael.
Thanks, Mikael.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Oh, boy.
You had quite a morning. Those
Yeah,
things
I'm so
happen.
sorry.
It's okay. Life intervenes sometimes and makes things complicated.
I gotta go print something off of worship, but I got your email about upcoming things. So next week is the Sunday after Thanksgiving where we
Right.
normally
We don't normally meet.
Okay.
Right.
And then the Sunday after though we do.
In the past, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So one thing I was wondering is we had Susan Weber on, who's a member of our congregation.
Right.
In the tradition of adult forum is having members of our congregation, an exception to the rule, or is it kind of looked at, is it kind of?
Oh, certainly not the exception. We
Okay.
do everything we can to draw on the talents of the folks
Okay.
in the congregation.
Okay. Okay. So I might, I might draw from the anti-racism team again.
Okay.
Just, one of the reasons is just I know that they're interested and invested in this work, right?
Right.
I was even wondering if, I don't know, like Nancy Lawrence Hill,
Mhm.
like she does interesting work. Just
She
for her
does?
job. Do you know if she's presented at adult forum?
I'm trying to remember because I missed one. I think she may have a year or two ago,
Okay.
but my memory's a little vague.
Okay.
Uh,
Okay. Well,
But no, by
regardless-
all means, we draw on the talents and
Okay.
people in the congregation if we can.
So regardless, I have my thinking cap on
Okay,
for coming up with some people.
and I was late. Obviously, I haven't gotten to the documentation to pay
Oh yeah.
$100 to each. So I can put this in your folder if you like. I have everything down here except I've forgotten what the standard entry is for Christian Ed. I
Okay.
think it's $310, but I could not remember that.
Okay.
So I'll have to put these. I also don't have the home address. I keep asking Robin for her home address, and she doesn't send it.
I have it.
You do?
Yeah.
Ah, okay, fine. That's great. Okay, well, I can put these in here.
Okay. Thank you, Lee. And
Okay.
thanks so much for thinking on your feet this morning.
Well, we had to muddle through a bit. Oh, Kirby was great. He
Yeah,
got
okay.
things going, so.
Good.
Thanks for the call
and,
again.
and it was recorded, which I'm so happy about. And
Yes.
it was, Kirby said it was recorded to the cloud,
Right,
which is good because then I can just download it from there. So
Yep.
good. Okay.
Okay.
Thanks, Lee.
yep.